very briefly, when I joined Tech in 1968, the company had been in Guernsey for 9 years and had grown significantly from the beginning. I guess when I joined, there were probably around 400 employees. And when you think that at that time, the population of Guernsey, I think I had a quick look. In 1960, the population of Guernsey was 47,000. So Tech was considerably the largest private employer. Obviously, the government was the largest employer. But at its very peak, I think I recall seeing a number of 702 employees. From the day I joined, I think I started as what we called a test trainee. That was a fast track to bring young people in and get them into a technical capacity. And it was a 6-month program run by a guy called Doug Campbell, who was the training manager at that time. And he was quite ahead of his time because he insisted that any training he gave had not just to be relevant to Tektronix, but it had to be to what was the UK standard qualification, which was called City and Guilds. They were a professional body, examination body in a vast range of areas, not just technical areas. But he insisted that the training was relevant to the City and Guilds qualifications. And in actual fact, in later years, back into the 70s and the early 80s, people from other organisations within Guernsey would come to Tektronix to undertake the training to that City and Guild standard. Now, I noticed the list of questions, Dave, that you mentioned. I've been having a quick look at. You said once you became a test technician, was it usual then to move to different locations? I would say no, it wasn't. It wasn't common. But what Tech Guernsey did do, if there were times when perhaps we had less work than some other areas, we would then offer technical assistance to other areas. So 1972, at least 2 groups of us spent time in Heron on the production line. I was in the second or third group of 4, and we spent about 6 weeks there. As a 20-year-old in Amsterdam, that was quite neat, really. We were working alongside colleagues who were doing exactly the same work that we were doing in Guernsey. And then later on into the early 80s, 2 of us were sent to Cologne in Germany 3 times. The first time I was in Cologne for about 6 weeks, and that was 1981. And I remember it was the summer of 81. It was horrendously hot, horrendously humid. The second time was literally just a week towards Christmas of 84. And then early in 85, a couple of weeks more. And then on my own, I was sent to the service centre in Munich in 85, I think that was. And into 86, I went and spent 2 weeks in Milan in Italy. And the whole point of that, excuse me, the whole point of that was to provide extra assistance to the service centre there because they had a huge backlog of work. And just as an interesting aside, when I was in Milan, I found out that at that time the Italians did not understand the concept of working overtime. Because when I said I was willing to work more hours than the standard, this was greeted with, this guy's crazy. He wants to work more hours. And it was just something that seemed to be outside of their knowledge, really.
I wonder what they would have thought of working all-nighters.
Yeah. Well, we've all done that at some time, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, moving from a technical background into HR, I think this was something that was probably almost unique to Tektronix at the time, because any post that was available to any employee. And certainly within the framework of Guernsey at that time, people tended to specialise and stay within that specialism. But I'd already been working there for 12, 14 years and was involved with something that was called the Tektronix Employees Mutual Benefit Club, which was basically an insurance scheme funded by the employees, run by the employees, to provide insurance for medical claims, which were not paid and are still not paid by the local government. And as part of that, I had a lot of interface with the finance department and the HR section. So when a post became available, I think I'd had enough of dealing with machines and wanted to actually use what I thought I had a skill as, dealing with people. Unfortunately, people answer back, whereas machines at that time certainly didn't. So welcome to hear any questions or comments, and I will answer whatever I can.
So one of the questions that we're all curious about is, tell us about the annual picnics. And then let me diverge to another topic off of that. One of the things we learned was the Miss Tektronix contest. And then I learned someone won it at 15. And I assumed she was a child of an employee, only to learn Guernsey hired 14 and 15-year-olds. And I'd love to hear more about how many young people did they have? And what was, did they move out of the house? Did they drive a car? Did they walk to work? Did they? So kind of the picnic, and then the young kids would be on my list.
Okay. Well, the annual picnic was a great thing. All you've got to do is to Google Guernsey and look at the map of Guernsey, which is an island basically triangular in shape, roughly 9 miles by 5. Off to the east coast of Guernsey, 3 miles away, is this little island called Herm, H-E-R-M, which is about 1 mile long and 1/4 mile wide. I love Herm. It's a fabulous place. And what used to happen was that a group of people would go over there on a Thursday, possibly Friday, dig chemical toilets into the ground, get the food ready, and then on the Saturday, everybody from Herm and their families would disappear over to Herm and have a fabulous day out. There was treasure hunts for the kids, there was tug of war competitions, there were all sorts of sort of entertainment. Certain alcoholic beverages were consumed, and we all came back on the boat later on. The boats took about 100 people at a time, and you could end up with anything like 1,000 people going over for the day. So moving on to the fact that we employed 14-year-olds. When I moved over to Guernsey with my parents in 1962, the minimum leaving age from school was 14. My own sister-in-law had a job at the age of 14, working in a local factory that produced and packaged cigarettes. Now, nowadays, of course, that just wouldn't be acceptable, but it was perfectly accepted then. By the time I was looking to join Tektronix, I joined at 16. The minimum leaving age from school at that time was 15. So yeah, there were a lot of 15, 16, 17-year-olds working at Tech, normally living at home. Normally, in those days, people lived at home until they got married, I guess. We got to the factory by the company actually paid to run a couple of buses, 2 or 3 buses around the island, so they would pick up employees from various points and deliver them to the factory on time to start at usually 7:30 in the morning. And I always remember the rule was that if you were an employee who arrived on the bus, if the bus was late, it didn't matter. Your time wasn't deducted because you were on a bus that was supplied by the company, and it was their duty to get you there on time. And I certainly remember on one occasion when I could drive, I got stuck behind one of these buses, which was involved in a traffic accident and was held up. And we all arrived at work 20 minutes late. The people that were on the bus got paid from 7:30. People like me who didn't arrive till 10 to 8, 5 to 8, got money deducted because we were late. It's like, at that time, and even to this day, a 14-year-old can ride a 50cc motor scooter or motorcycle. So some 14-year-olds were able to get there under their own steam. And yeah, there was a lot of, particularly the girls on the assembly lines were teenagers who would work their way through for several years. Hope that helps.
So how did things transpire at Guernsey after Heron got started up? Was there much of a decline then, or what?
No, I think at that time, certainly the 70s and into the 80s, there was no, it wasn't a fact of being in competition with Heron. We saw them very much as a partner. And in fact, when the 7000 series assembly line was taken away from Guernsey and was moved to Heron, they sent a group of technicians and engineers over to see how the products were put together, how they were tested. And I remember one of them saying to us that they were quite worried that they would be given a very poor reception by Guernsey people because they were taking work away. And they were surprised to find that actually we were more than happy to give them all the information because they were still part of Tektronix.
Where was Tele Equipment located, and was there any crossover between employees of the two companies?
Yeah, I don't know about crossover of employees, but Guernsey certainly produced a lot of the telequipment scopes. Memory says D54. I don't know where that came from, but D54 was a mainstream telequipment product.
Where was it located?
Sorry, say again?
Where was Tele Equipment located?
Telequipment was located in the UK,
Yeah.
Harpenden, I think.
Hoddesdon.
Hoddesdon.
Near London?
Yep. So I've got another item on the list that says we heard there was an initial concern about Tektronix involvement with nuclear testing. Was it a real issue? Well, that was way before my time, but I remember seeing newspaper articles around 1960, 61, saying that people in Guernsey were concerned that Tektronix was involved in the nuclear industry. I've never heard from ex-colleagues that was a great, I think it might have been newspapers trying to make a story, perhaps. Surely not.
What kind of a reputation did Tektronix have in the eyes of the local people at Guernsey?
We're now 32, nearly 33 years since Tektronix pulled out of Guernsey, and you will still hear people saying that was probably the best employer the island has known.
I have a question about how were people received when they came over from the US? Did they come over a lot? Was that considered help? Was that considered something else? And the second question is, do the ex-Guernsey employees still get together, or is there still kind of any kind of social kind of grouping going on?
Okay, well, in reverse order, there's no sort of official get together of tech people. We have the Tech Guernsey Facebook page, which I know some of you have contacted, and my wife is one of the administrators of that page. I'm not on Facebook. I don't want to be on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn, but I'm not on Facebook. And a lot of there's a lot of transactions there, particularly with ex-employees and children, and sometimes the grandchildren of ex-employees. How did we get on with the Americans? Generally, I think pretty well. I'm trying to think of some of the names of people. Earl Wansland was one who, I think the perception was that he was biased towards Herrenveen as opposed to Guernsey, but I don't know if that's a fact. Others that I remember, John Landis, Dick Montag. Our final general manager was a guy called Fred Tisney. I would love to know what's happened to Fred, because I've not heard anything of him since he left here. Other than that, he left Tech not long afterwards, so that would have been early 90s. Fred was, how do I put it? Larger than life in more ways than one. He was a real bear of a man. It was just after I'd moved into HR, and he came in one day and he said, "I'm going on a diet." and he weighed 26 stone. There's 14 pounds to a stone, and my maths is not that good anymore. He went on a diet, and he came in about 6 months later. Yeah, that sounds about right. He came in one day about 6 months later and said, "Well, I'm now exactly half the man I used to be."
Wow.
Yeah, unfortunately, within 6 months, he was almost back where he had been 6 months previously. But that was his personality. I think he was the obsessive compulsive personality. He was a nice guy. I got on well with him. He had the pain of overseeing the closure of Tektronix in Guernsey, but he had been instrumental in making sure that the employees got what they deserved, which was more than the statutory requirement, shall we say. There is still very little redundancy legislation in Guernsey, but Fred fought tooth and nail to get a good deal for us all. And I think that's another reason for Tech being so well remembered, is the fact that when it closed down, it was demonstrated that it wasn't the fault of Guernsey. It was the fact that Guernsey was probably the cheapest one to close down at the time, if we're being perfectly honest.
One of our visitors that I mentioned it from Guernsey worked for a spin-off after the Tech closure. Did you do that too?
I personally didn't, but if you look up a couple of companies, one is called Polar Instruments, and another one is called Offshore Electronics. They were both set up and manned by people who had worked at Tektronix. I actually went to work for a small local management consultancy where we provided staff and management training and computer training. I worked there for about 10 or 12 years, and then after that I moved into, well, we call it the civil service. It's a government employee. I was a government employee for the last 15 years of my working career.
With respect to the closure of Guernsey versus Heronveen, it was my understanding that the laws where Heronveen were located were, I'm going to say, so restrictive in terms of the price they had to pay to shut down Heronveen versus the price they had to pay versus Guernsey, even though Guernsey was probably a little more profitable than Heronveen. And so they chose to shut down Guernsey instead. So it sounds like it was purely a financial consideration.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, my wife has a brother who still lives in the Netherlands, has lived there for a long time, and obviously we've got a good handle on how things happen in the Netherlands, and certainly their restrictions on redundancies, benefits generally are a lot superior to what has ever been on offer in Guernsey, and it therefore meant that Guernsey was the cheapest one to close down.
Was Polar Instruments a spectrum analyzer company? Or are they?
It's not specifically spectrum analyzers, but they do similar sort of things. Yeah. And they were actually set up by the guy I mentioned earlier on, who was our training manager, Doug Campbell, who unfortunately we lost just last month. he was an eccentric guy in that he was gadget mad. He loved his gadgets, but if you had to read an instruction manual to use the gadget, it wasn't worth anything in his eyes. A gadget had to be, you take it out of the box and you can use it. He was also instrumental, him and a friend of his were instrumental in introducing to Guernsey, we call it windsurfing, I think you call it board sailing. And certainly in the late 70s, early 80s, him and his friend were instrumental in teaching a guy called Prince Charles how to windsurf in Guernsey. I don't know whatever happened to him, but
so Pat is our archivist. He does a wonderful job going through donated materials, which are newspapers and clippings and things people send us. And between him and I, we tried to figure out how to create a website that got broad appeal for people worldwide. And then we take kind of the key things from there and happen to the museum and do the monthly newsletter. So I'd appreciate, and you can do this some other time if you want, any feedback on the website and the newsletters in terms of, are they interesting for people from an international standpoint? Do they kind of capture? Because I can't tell you whether the stuff we wrote on Guernsey is true or not. I think it is. It's the best we could figure out.
Yeah.
well, like any good journalist, it doesn't have to be true to make a good story, does it? But certainly what I've read pretty much reflects my vision of what happened. I am still in touch with some very good friends who were ex-colleagues of mine. In fact, I was looking at the Vintage Tech site the other day, and you've got a section there on, what do you call them? Display cruiser. We in Europe, we didn't like the word cruiser because it tended to sound like a battleship. We called it the demo bus.
Mhm.
The demo bus went around Europe, and one of my ex-colleagues was one of the person that manned that demo bus, and I've already suggested to him that he goes onto your website, because you were asking for the names of people in certain photos, and he was one of them. So I think from the Guernsey perspective, if you want to leave a message on the Guernsey Facebook page asking for more contributions, I think you'll get quite a few.
Yeah, but you won't see it. On the topic of display cruisers, the way that page came about is I had a page on Tech Masters, and one ex-Tech employee was doing a Google search for his name, and he hit on that page. And so he contacted me, and in the conversation, I found out he's the one who drove the bus in the US. And so he started supplying me some information. I would love to get more information on the bus in Europe, if that individual has pictures or whatever. That would be very interesting.
Okay, well, next time I speak to him, I will make a point of giving him a kick to get something done.
Yeah, we want to capture this history before it's just gone.
Sure.
And we're getting close to some of it being gone.
Yep.
The museum maintains an email list, and once a month we send out the newsletter via the email. I checked and I didn't find the name Bradshaw on our list. Would you be interested in being added to the list?
Yes, please.
Please supply maybe Dave or Bob with your email address that you'd like to have us put on the list, and we'll do that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll send it to you, Jerry.
Yeah, Dave has already got that. So
Okay.
happy to pass that on.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time. I guess now we'll probably run through the rest of the agenda, but you're welcome to stay on and just hang out if you want. We do this weekly.
No, I think I shall continue with this. But what I would ask is, if you have any more questions, please feel free to use the email address you've got, and I'll be happy to come back on another Friday evening and do the same again in the future.
Yeah, let me just comment on that. Garrett DeVries is kind of my contact for Herrenvein.
Yep.
I've got a contact for Sony Tech. I guess I will start using you for a contact for Guernsey. Because if stuff comes up and we can't make sense, I usually just shoot off an email. Does this make any sense to you, or kind of give me what it is?
Yep.
But I'm always looking for contacts from the various regions to just help us sort out stuff that we can't figure out.
Fine. Yep, more than happy to oblige if I can.
Thank you.